Hey guys, it's Bailey and welcome back to the channel. This is going to be a top products video. If you're familiar with the channel, you watch for a while, you know I like to do top 5 in under 5s, where I tell you about my top 5 favorite products in a given category in under 5 minutes. But the topic for today's video is matte eyeshadow palette by special request from a few of you guys. Have actually been asking me to kind of round up my favorites here. So I did, and I could not narrow it down to 5. I think you'll be able to see why. There are kind of lots of different categories. There's been an explosion of wonderful matte eyeshadow palettes as of late, so didn't want to leave any out. As a result, I'm just going to go over 5 products and certainly over 5 minutes. So then without further ado, let's just go ahead and hop in. I want to start with a palette that I've kind of started it for me. I don't think it is the kind of oldest of these matte palettes. There might be 1 or 2 older than that, but when I first started looking at matte eyeshadow palettes, this is the one that kind of started the wave. It is the IT Cosmetics Naturally Pretty palette, and I got this when it first came out. Loved it, still continue to love it. You can see it has a really nice variety of shades, everything from light neutral, you have some colorfuls here, you have some warm shades, some deep plums and navy, and then you even have this transforming pearl shade in case you don't actually want to commit to going all the way matte. You have additional versatility there. But since then, there's actually been another palette that's very similar but slightly more compact, and frankly I like the packaging better, so it's definitely worth mentioning. It is the Stila Eyes Are the Window Shadow Palette, and this is the Mind palette, which is the all matte. You might remember that they used to have like In the Garden, In the Know, In the something or other. I think In the Know was the matte palette, and it was the cardboard Stila, like when they had those cardboard packaging. I think those are entirely discontinued at this point, to be replaced by these amazing gilded palettes. Beautiful. But this is the matte equivalent now, and what was strange when I first saw this is that the palette is shockingly similar. There are like 1 or 2 less shadows in this palette than there are in the Naturally Pretty, but overall the palette, the shade selection, super duper similar, but frankly I like this packaging more. The Naturally Pretty palette is just like a little dated to me. It has this puffy pink packaging that just gets super dirty like very easily. And so I like the sleekness of this packaging. It kind of does the job with a couple less shadows, but they're just as good a quality. I would say the major difference is that Stilas are slightly drier than the IT Cosmetics. The IT Cosmetics are a little bit more buttery. It doesn't mean the Stilas are any harder to blend. It's just when it comes down to texture, these are just a little bit drier. So if you have a preference, and maybe you do, something to note between the two, but for the most part, they accomplish super similar things while also giving you that variety in shade. You get the neutrals, you get some colors. It's just, both of these are amazing. Next, I want to talk affordable matte palettes. Coming in at the top here is e.l.f.'s Mad for Matte palette. They came out with quite a few of these 10-pan eyeshadow palettes earlier in the year, but one was entirely matte. Now this is definitely a neutral lover's dream. It's kind of like the Naked palette equivalent, but matte. In terms of like the shade spectrum, you do get a nice range all the way from light kind of stark cream to deep dark matte black, and black is the word I'm looking for, and pretty much everything in between, including warm tone, cool tone, neutrals, browns, grays, you name it, it's in there. But it definitely lacks the color variety. That being said, I think this palette is between $6 and $10, probably $8 if I had to guess. But for that price, this shade range, and the quality of these shadows, it easily wins the most affordable shadow palette for being an all matte palette. Such a good little palette. A notable comparison that I want to mention, despite the fact that the Sonia Kashuk Ion Neutral 02 palette is an amazing palette, very, very similar in shade range to the e.l.f. Mad for Matte palette. I would say that the Sonia Kashuk are slightly more creamy, more easy to blend together. The e.l.f.'s take a little bit of extra work to blend and get that effortless matte eye look, whereas the Sonia Kashuk don't. However, given the price difference, the Sonia Kashuk is probably double, maybe triple with the what is it? It's like the P's turn into F's. I don't know what's going on. It's about probably triple what the e.l.f. is, and not that that breaks the bank. It's certainly less than a lot of other palettes I'm going to talk about here, but just in terms of comparison, I think the shade range is super similar, but the e.l.f. might trump it because the quality, given the price, the quality is not that much different compared to the Sonia Kashuk. However, if you are a Sonia Kashuk fan and this particular palette appeals to you for whatever reason it does, it's a great little palette as well. Another affordable palette that was definitely worth mentioning, and very similar, I would say, in color selection. It still doesn't doesn't offer up a ton of variety in the way of shade selection, but it does differ slightly, is the Hard Candy Top 10 Trendsetters eyeshadow collection, and this is in Birthday Suit. I hauled this couple months, probably 6 months back at this point, but it's a great little matte eyeshadow palette, and what kind of sets it apart is that it definitely, well, it includes some navies. You get brown tones and navies, but also this warm camel shade. It's kind of a unique selection of matte neutrals, as you can see, relatively different from those that I've shown you in the Sonia Kashuk and the e.l.f. palettes, because you get that pop of navy, although it is a very deep navy. It's not like a pop, but it is a very pigmented navy. These, once again, very smooth and creamy, easy to blend into each other, easy to use alone or to complement like a shimmery shadow if you have going on, but definitely worth mentioning in the realm of affordable matte eyeshadow palettes. Moving out of the drugstore realm, but into some serious must-haves nonetheless, I want to start with Kat Von D's Shade and Light Eye Contour Palette. This is the kind of eyeshadow equivalent of the face contour palette, which I gotta be really honest, and it's not for everyone, wasn't for me. Despite the hype, I just did not see what everyone was raving about. This, on the other hand, unbelievable. All of these shadows have exactly the same quality you'd expect from a Kat Von D eyeshadow palette, but there's such a unique mixture of warm and cool tones. You get this kind of bricky neutral brown, this interesting light cool taupe mixed with a cool or a warmer peachy like kind of equivalent. You could use one or the other depending on whether you're going for a warm or cool look. And just so you know, because I was kind of unaware of this when I first picked this and any of Kat Von D's shadows up, but these are arranged in different eye looks. So like this quad over here is supposed to be like, all these shadows are supposed to coordinate to create one look, and same for the center quad and the quad over on this end. So it is not that she's kind of pre-assembled them to give you that eye look, but personally they all jive well together, and so feel free to just like, in fact I did a tutorial here probably a while back, but it's an amazing staple go-to eyeshadow palette when you just don't want to have to worry about shadow quality. You know it's going to be good 100% of the time. It's good to wear alone. It's good to wear all together for a completely matte eyeshadow look, and it really does offer up some unique eyeshadow shades as far as matte palettes go. Then the next, it's not really a palette, but kind of a collection of eyeshadow shades that I think is worth mentioning, mostly because in my mind it's kind of an abbreviated version, a very abbreviated version of the Shade and Light Eye Contour palette. If you love the idea of that, but you don't necessarily want all that variety, the Melt Cosmetics Dark Matter Eyeshadow Stack it's amazing. The shadow quality is amazing, and you get a ton of product in each eyeshadow pan if you really just want to stick to some core matte neutrals. This is an amazing quad to reach for. So the first shadow you have here is Blur, and I actually have a whole review of both this and the other eyeshadow stack that is actually somewhere in the background here, but you can go watch that. I'll put a link somewhere. This is the shade Blur. It's kind of your classic light brown. Then you have slightly darker, which is Unseen, which is kind of this deeper, somewhat warmer chocolate shade. Moving on to a completely matte black, which is actually the shade Dark Matter, possibly one of the deepest, mattest blacks I have ever experienced, and all of these can be used both wet and dry. So this kind of acts a little bit like a cake eyeshadow, which is really nice, although the opacity of this definitely rivals the matte black in the Kat Von D palette that I just mentioned. Like, both are extremely black. You can sheer them out, but you can also really build them for a super opaque black eye look. And then the last shadow is probably my absolute favorite. It is Enigma, and it's this beautiful brick red. And the reason that this is why, in my mind, this stack kind of stacks up, pun intended, to the Shade and Light eyeshadow palette is because quite a few of these eyeshadows have that red brown undertone, and so what I like doing with this Dark Matter stack is mixing that bricky red color in with some of those lighter and even that mid-tone brown shade to get these exact shade combinations. So you do have to work a little bit to get this kind of thing, but like I said, if you're not looking for a whole palette like this, you really want to focus on your core neutrals, this is an amazing quad to get. Speaking of more somewhat abbreviated eyeshadow palettes, I couldn't do this video without mentioning the Urban Decay Naked Basics palettes. There is the 1 and the 2. Both are kind of supposed to mimic their respective original Naked palettes. The Naked, just regular Naked Basics is somewhat warmer. I find there's a little bit more variety, and to be honest, this is not a strictly matte palette. A lot of people, and me included, will say that Venus definitely has some shimmer still, and I've actually, once again, I will link all the stuff I'm talking about down below, but I do have a tutorial where I use this not only on my eyes, but this is a great little contour palette as well, because none, despite saying that these are warm, none of them veer too incredibly warm. They're still very flattering as face shades, but I do say they're warm simply because, by comparison, the Naked 2, which, like I said, is supposed to mimic the cooler, larger Naked 2 palette, Naked Basics 2 is just somewhat cooler. I think it heavies up a little bit more in these deeper neutral tones, whereas the original Naked Basics is a little bit heavier in the lighter. There are no repeats between the two. They are very similar, but you do get, if you get both of them, they're unique shades across the board. But if you're just looking for the cutest, tiniest travel palette to get all your matte essentials, keep in mind it is a Neutral Lovers matte essentials palette, these are a great way to go. Two more palettes. The first one, we're actually going back more into the affordable realm. It is a Morphe palette, actually the one and only Morphe palette I have tried so far, but I saw this on Haute Look and had to give it a try because I had been looking for kind of a broader selection of affordable eyeshadow palettes. This is the 35N, so it's more neutral leaning matte shadows. I do think they have a warm, maybe even a cool, or maybe it's a matte smoky palette, but either way, this is an entire palette full of neutral shadows. And so not only is this in the affordable realm, I think I got it for 15, but it can swing anywhere between like 12 and 20 depending on where and when you buy it. But either way, you get 35 eyeshadow shades in here. Once again, not only a nice mix of tones, everything from light, the lightest of light to deepest of deep. Even though it says it's neutral, it leans on warm and cool. You get something a little bit warmer here versus something a little bit cooler up here. You get a pink, some purples, some peaches and plums. Like, there's just a great color variety. Even this like gray, this pretty blue leaning gray tone over here. Just a ton of variety. That being said, there is a little bit of redundancy. Like, I don't think you need this entire palette as far as shades go, like this entire top row. Very nuanced. I mean, subtly nuanced. You could probably consolidate a couple of those shadows into like 3 or 4 and be good to go. Same with this kind of corner down here. That being said though, those are kind of the shades that I imagine a lot of people are going to go to. So the second you run out of one pan, rather than having to replace it, just go to the next one. It'll probably do just as good of a job. So a great option if you're looking for an affordable palette and without sacrificing variety. And last, couldn't have a matte shadow video where I didn't talk about this palette. You probably are all seeing it coming if you are familiar with the channel and have watched the past few videos. This is the Visiart Dark Matte Palette. There is a light matte version, but when Sephora was having a 20% VIB thing and I was trying to decide between the two, the light matte looks like it just has a lot of colors, especially given all the matte shadow palettes that I've just shown you. It looks like I could duplicate a lot of those in all the palettes I already have. This guy, on the other hand, I mean, the collection of shades is just so unique, not just together in one palette, but in looking at all these shades, don't have them in any of the other palettes I have. These rich greens, you have both a red and blue leaning purple, red and blue leaning red, this beautiful like sunflowery pumpkin orange. It's an amazing mixture of shades. I'm actually wearing these two greens down here on my eyes with something over top. It's actually, I have a duochrome over top, but one thing I love about using these deep dark matte shadows as bases is that they really make any sort of duochrome shadow you have pop. That whatever that duochrome shade is, that kind of latent shade in a duochrome shadow, really makes it pop when you use something kind of deeper like this underneath. So I am wearing this today, even though you might not be able to tell, but these are they're amazing. The shadow quality, some people ask if it's worth the 80 bucks. I would say yes, because I have also ordered 2 more, but the shadow quality is just, it's really hard to beat. Also, these are made to be used both wet and dry, kind of like the dark matter eyeshadow stack, so you really get virtually 2 different shadows. I mean, with varying intensities. It's less of a color change, more of an intensity change, but it makes this palette extra versatile, and like I said, the shade combination is pretty unheard of, I think. So those are all of my picks for matte eyeshadow palettes. I really hope that those of you who wanted to see this video enjoyed it and got whatever you were hoping for out of it, and maybe those of you who weren't expecting it found some palettes that you are now lusting after. Sorry, not sorry. They're amazing palettes. I recommend all of them, so you won't be disappointed, I don't think. Anywho, thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.